Let's get in the interweb subscribers and welcome back to Drama with Ted and Tina. I, Tina, will be your host narrator in this family dookie show today. Her parents drained her trust fund to spoil her sister, assuming she'd stay quiet and grateful, like a well-trained family dog. But when the bank manager called with urgent news, their plastic smiles cracked because the account had one tiny little feature they never anticipated, a failsafe. Her name is Olivia Langford, and her story begins with betrayal wearing a button down and pearls. At 25, I found out my parents had quietly looted the $27 million 0 cents trust my grandparents left for me. They didn't just rob me, they mugged my future in broad daylight, blindfolded me with lies, and told me it was all for the greater good. But the call came at 6:00 a.m. on a Tuesday, ruining what should have been a perfectly average day of spreadsheets, CAD software, and pretending I cared about rooftop solar panel alignment. I was mentally calculating how many emails I could ignore before coffee when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Normally, I'd let that go straight to voicemail, assuming it was spam or a distant relative asking for money. But that morning, I answered, and everything shattered. Miss Langford? Olivia Langford? The voice was smooth and corporate, like a man who practiced empathy in the mirror. This is William Redford from First Atlantic Private Banking. Apologies for the hour, but I've been trying to reach you for several days. It's regarding your grandparents' trust. I blinked. The trust? The one that barely covered tuition and allegedly dried up faster than my love life post-pandemic? There's got to be a mistake, I said, sitting up so fast I almost launched my cat off the bed. That trust was used for school. It's been closed for years. The pause that followed was long enough for me to question my entire life. Miss Langford, he said gently, the trust was worth approximately $27 million. You were to gain access when you turned 25 or completed your graduate education, whichever came first. You turned 25 last month, yet when we initiated the transfer, well, we ran into a problem. He hesitated, that slight, calculated pause where you know something's coming and your stomach clenches before your brain can catch up. We discovered a series of unauthorized withdrawals and account transfers dating back 3 years. The air in the room changed. My ceiling, my floor, my sense of gravity, none of it felt reliable. That's impossible, I whispered, gripping the edge of my mattress like it might stop the spinning. My parents told me the trust was just enough for college, that it was gone. Another silence, this one heavy, with the weight of someone preparing to tell you Santa Claus is a con artist and your family helped fund the lie. The original trust was significant, he continued. Your grandparents were quite successful. You weren't informed of the full value by design. That's not why I'm calling. I'm calling because approximately 93% of the trust has been withdrawn. I swallowed hard. By who? I asked, though deep down I already knew. The trust had 2 co-trustees until your 20th birthday, Redford said, now fully in lawyer mode. Yourself and your father, Dr. Elliot Langford? And there it was, the name I had already seen forming in my mind like smoke before a fire. The withdrawals were made using a power of attorney, he continued, his voice straining to remain neutral, which appears to have been signed when you were 22. Do you recall authorizing that document? I closed my eyes. Oh, I remembered. Senior year, Christmas break, home for the holidays, slightly tipsy off Mom's secret recipe eggnog that was more bourbon than nutmeg. My dad had slid a stack of papers across the dining table while Mom refilled my glass, both of them wearing their best, "We're so proud of you" smiles. Just some standard trust forms, he'd said. Graduation's around the corner, bank needs updated signatures. I had signed without reading. Because why wouldn't I trust the man who once grounded me for sneaking candy? Turns out, he was the one stealing the whole damn store. Where did the money go? I asked, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else, someone quieter, more polite, less likely to scream. Another pause, the kind that makes you realize someone's about to choose their next words like they're holding a bomb. Well, the funds were moved to another trust account, Redford said. Also, at our institution, that account was opened under the name Ashlyn Langford. My sister. Of course it was. Ashlyn, the human Pinterest board. Ashlyn, the walking scholarship. Ashlyn, the only person in the family whose footsteps didn't just echo, they were paved in gold leaf. She was 22, in med school at Stanford, and apparently moonlighting as the silent beneficiary of my life savings. I should have been surprised. Instead, I just felt nauseous. Miss Langford? Redford added, almost hesitantly now. The transaction pattern is unusual enough that our fraud detection team flagged it. The power of attorney appears legitimate. but the behavior doesn't. I interrupted him before he could code it in more corporate language. It can't be recovered, can it? I asked, and to my surprise, my voice didn't shake. That felt like a small miracle. Redford didn't answer right away. I heard soft keystrokes, maybe checking one more time, hoping for a different answer, or maybe pretending to, because even he didn't want to say it out loud. We're still assessing what might be legally challenged, he said, which was a very expensive way of saying probably not. The words landed like bricks in my chest. The trust wasn't just money. It was a message from the two people who saw me, who believed I could make something of myself. And now it was a memory written in red ink and bank logs. Thank you, I said numbly. I hung up the call, stared at the blank wall in front of me, and realized the worst part wasn't that they stole from me. It was that they never thought I'd notice. That's complicated, Redford finally said, in that way professionals do when what they really mean is a legal hellscape awaits. If the power of attorney was obtained fraudulently, or if the funds were used in a manner contrary to the trust's intent, you may have grounds for recovery, but that would likely involve legal action against the co-trustee. He paused. Against your father. The words sat there, dense as lead. Legal action against my father. Against the man whose approval I spent my entire childhood chasing like a lab rat hitting a dopamine lever. Against the federal judge who taught law seminars by day and cooked filet mignon on Sundays. Against my own family. I need to see everything, I said after a beat. All the documentation, all the transfers, every shred of it. He nodded, composed. Of course. I have cleared my schedule until noon. Can you come in this morning? And just like that, the next chapter of my life was penciled in, starting with a pile of paperwork and the slow cremation of every family holiday memory I ever had. An hour later, I was sitting in a sterile conference room at First Atlantic Private Banking, the kind of place that smells like polished mahogany and legacy wealth. Spread across the table was a crime scene. My trust fund, dissected. My grandfather's meticulous signature, dated shortly after my birth. My grandmother's will, reaffirming the trust after her death when I was 12. The power of attorney, the document that I had unknowingly signed over Christmas eggnog, giving my father total control, and the transfers, dozens of them, cold and methodical, moving my inheritance piece by piece into a trust with my sister's name on it. The largest was for nearly $800,000, 0 cents. Just 3 months ago, the same week my sister was accepted to Stanford Med. Coincidentally, the same week my parents took her on a celebratory Europe trip and told me, you should stay and water the plants, Liv, and you've been working so hard at the firm. Meanwhile, I was surviving off grocery store ramen, barely scraping together rent on an entry-level salary, and paying student loans I should never have needed. Your grandparents were quite clear in their intentions, Redford said gently, sliding over another envelope. This letter was to be given to you upon assuming control of the trust. The handwriting was unmistakable. My grandmother's perfect loops and slanted strokes, written just months before cancer took her. My dearest Olivia, it began, if you're reading this, you've reached an important milestone. The funds in this trust represent not just financial security, but a deep belief in your potential. Your grandfather and I always saw something special in you. A quiet fire, a brilliant mind that questioned everything, and a heart that feels deeply even when you try to hide it. I felt a lump rising in my throat. We arranged this trust to give you freedom, freedom to live boldly, to pursue your passions, to be unafraid of making big choices. Use it wisely, but don't be afraid to use it joyfully. Your parents don't know the full amount that was intentional. Your father has complicated views on money. This was always meant to be yours when you were ready. Build your life on truth, courage, and compassion. With all my love, Grandma Eleanor. I ran my fingers over her signature, feeling the soft indentation where the pen pressed into the paper. Tangible proof she meant every word. I imagined her at the kitchen table, maybe wrapped in one of those wool shawls she refused to give up, her body giving out even as her mind stayed razor sharp. Writing me a love letter disguised as financial instructions. Words I was supposed to read 3 years ago, words meant to protect me from the very betrayal I was now wading through. Miss Langford? Mr. Redford's voice brought me back. I blinked, wiping a stray tear before it could embarrass me. Given the circumstances, he said gently, I have already conferred with our legal department. They believe you have viable grounds to pursue legal action. Legal action? Against my own father? Against the man who taught me how to drive, how to shake hands like I meant it, how to lie with a smile when the situation called for it. What would that entail? I asked, even though what I really meant was, how do I set fire to the only house I've ever known and not choke on the smoke. It won't be easy, Redford said, soft but unwavering. Your father's a federal judge and very well connected. This will draw attention, he paused. But the documents are clear, your grandparents' intentions are explicit, and the circumstances around the power of attorney are questionable at best. I stared at the paperwork spread in front of me, dozens of pages filled with signatures and numbers that told a story even I couldn't deny anymore. I gathered them slowly, deliberately, stacking the betrayal into neat rectangles like building blocks for whatever came next, each sheet a lie exposed, a choice made without me, a reminder that the people who raised me were capable of choosing convenience over truth. Thank you, Mr. Redford, I said, voice quiet but steady. I'll need time to process this. He nodded and slid a crisp business card across the table, like a croupier dealing the first card in a very expensive, very personal game of war. For what it's worth, Miss Langford, he said as I stood, I worked with your grandfather for many years. He was a man of extraordinary integrity. I believe he would be deeply troubled by what's happened. I nodded once, slipping the card into my coat pocket, then gathered my things and left without another word. The conference room door clicked shut behind me with the finality of a cell door. When I stepped out into the morning light, it hit me like a punch. The sun too bright, the street too loud, the world too oblivious to the tectonic shift that had just occurred in mine. I merged into the crowd on the sidewalk, face calm, posture upright. But inside, I was a storm, bottled just tight enough to pass for composed. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I wouldn't fight. They thought I'd just keep watering the damn plant. Let's see how they handle me now. All around me, people rushed by on phones, clutching coffees, shouting into Bluetooth headsets like the fate of the free world depended on their 9 a.m. meeting. Meanwhile, I stood still, a ghost in broad daylight, as if someone had hit pause on everything inside me. My phone buzzed. A text from my boss. Everything okay? You're not in. Then another from my mother. So casual, it felt like a punch. Lunch next week, sweetie. Rebecca's home from Stanford on Thursday. My hands clenched. The sheer normalcy of it made my skin crawl. Commuters streamed past me like water around a rock, while the full weight of what I just learned slammed into me again. They hadn't just stolen money. They'd stolen the truth. They watched me juggle rent and student loans with a fake smile while quietly moving my inheritance to the sister they adored. And now I had to decide what to do about it. Rage, retreat, or ruin. The world looked exactly the same as it had yesterday, but I wasn't. That version of me, the one who believed in family above all else, who trusted her parents implicitly and played the role of dependable, unremarkable older daughter, she died sometime between my alarm going off and William Redford uttering the words unauthorized withdrawals. In her place stood someone else, someone heavier with truth, someone who had a choice to make. Confront them or protect what was left of the illusion. Fight or fold. Speak or stay quiet. As I finally moved, merging back into the swarm of pedestrians like I hadn't just watched my life implode in a conference room, only one thing was clear. There was no going back. The foundation had cracked permanently, and whatever rose from the rubble wouldn't resemble the dutiful girl who signed without reading. I was Olivia Langford, granddaughter of Eleanor and Robert Langford, and for the first time I saw myself and them for exactly who we were. I returned to the office, though I barely remember the walk. I sat at my desk, clicking through project files like my brain wasn't leaking out of my ears. I answered emails on autopilot, took 2 meetings, pretended I was fine, but my hands trembled. My rendering files were full of errors. Marcus, one of the senior architects, returned a marked-up draft with a concerned eyebrow raise. Rough night? He asked, not unkindly. Something like that, I muttered, giving him a smile that felt stapled on. By 5, the mask was slipping so badly, I didn't even try to fake it. I packed up, turned down a happy hour invite, and walked into the evening like a zombie in business casual. My apartment, the small 1-bedroom I'd once been proud of, found on my own, furnished with patience and hand-me-downs, now felt like a punchline, a tribute to all the years I believed I had no choice but to struggle, while my sister cruised through life on cruise control, funded by my birthright. I went through the motions of the evening like a machine, changing into sweatpants, microwaving leftovers, checking the mail. A thick envelope from my student loan servicer sat on top like a cherry on a garbage sundae. Deferment was ending, payments resuming. The irony almost made me laugh. I'd spent the last 3 years eating bulk ramen and calculating whether I could afford decent toothpaste while my sister was flown to Europe to broaden her horizons. That Audi she drove for safety? Mine. That Stanford tuition? Mine. My parents had robbed me to build her dream life while telling me mine was a character-building exercise. My phone buzzed, again and again, missed calls, unread texts, my mother, my father, Rebecca. Friends asking about brunch, plans, weekends. My life kept moving forward, oblivious, but I wasn't moving. I was cemented in the moment the illusion shattered, trapped in the emotional aftershock of realizing my whole life had been built on a lie. By midnight, sleep wasn't even pretending to be an option. I sat at my desk and did what I'd been trained to do: draft blueprints, only this time not for buildings, for my life. I sketched out a timeline like it was a structural analysis. At the top, my grandparents, Eleanor and Robert Langford, first generation entrepreneurs who built a manufacturing company from nothing and sold it for millions when I was 10. Then my father, Lelliot Langford, law school prodigy turned youngest federal judge in the state. My mother, Caroline, the well-bred socialite with friends in every charity league and a Rolodex that opened doors for my father like magic. And us, their daughters. Me, Olivia, practical, predictable, pursuer of architecture not because I loved it, but because dad said it was stable. And Rebecca, 3 years younger, golden, exceptional, adored. Med school wasn't just supported, it was celebrated, funded, elevated. I mapped us out like a framework, labeling every relationship like a beam, every deception like a crack. The entire structure looked beautiful until you realized where the load was breaking. The pattern emerged with cruel surgical clarity, a lifetime of being the steady one, the backup plan, the quietly passed over daughter. Expectations weren't just different, they were calibrated on entirely separate instruments. Rebecca's life was framed in opportunity, mine in sacrifice dressed as practicality. That summer, I spent hauling coffee and blueprints during an unpaid internship. My parents called it character building, while they flew Rebecca to Honduras for a prestigious Instagram-worthy medical mission. I got a used Toyota and a lukewarm clap on the back when I graduated. She got a brand new Mercedes and a champagne brunch. While I was being told to be prudent, practical, realistic, Rebecca was encouraged to dream, to soar, to save the world on my dime, and I accepted it, every bit of it. I had internalized the message so well that I thought it was my own voice telling me architecture was enough, that saving lives was noble, and designing the places they happened in was somehow less. The real question, the one keeping my chest tight and sleep out of reach, was had they always meant to do this? Or had it just become convenient over time? Did they look at us, one reliable, the other radiant, and make a calculated decision to invest in brilliance? Or did they rationalize it into something noble, redirecting my inheritance for the greater good? The altruistic embezzlement of parenthood. By dawn, my timeline had turned into a forensic blueprint of betrayal. Pages upon pages of moments I once wrote off as normal now screamed with imbalance. Dates, discrepancies, dollar signs. There were no accidents here, just a careful, sustained erosion of my worth in favor of Rebecca's spotlight. As sunlight crept across my floor, one thing was clear. This wasn't just about money. It was about value, about who deserved opportunity and who was expected to be grateful with scraps. They didn't just steal my trust fund. They rewired my self-worth, and I'd thank them for it. They'd built a whole mythology around my practicality as if it were inherent instead of instilled. They convinced me my modest goals were mine, not shaped by a childhood of being told no, while my sister got, of course. That realization cracked me open. If my sense of place in this family was fiction, then so was everything I believed about my potential, my future, my deservedness. Maybe I wasn't the supporting role. Maybe I'd just been edited that way. My phone rang, vibrating with urgency. My mother, her name lit up the screen like a warning flare. For a second, I considered answering, but even the architect in me knew better. No structure holds if you build on a cracked foundation. This confrontation needed steel supports and reinforced logic. So instead, I opened my laptop and typed asset recovery attorney. I scheduled 3 consults, one with Catherine Wu, who quoted Roosevelt and had a record that made law firms nervous, one with Gabrielle Martinez, a bulldog in inheritance litigation, and one with Diane Lockhart, a former prosecutor who specialized in abuse of power cases. Today, I wasn't the obedient daughter. I was the architect of war. I called in sick, something I hadn't done in 3 years. Then I got to work. I sorted every bank statement, copied my grandmother's letter, and wrote a blunt, bullet-pointed summary of the family dysfunction that brought me here. Catherine Wu's office was on the 27th floor of a downtown high-rise, all brushed metal, glass, and minimalist intimidation. She listened carefully, never interrupting, but I saw the flicker in her expression when I said federal judge. She made a note. That complicates things, she said evenly. I nodded. Yes, he has connections, and if this goes public, it likely will, she confirmed. Cases involving high-preference families rarely stay private. You'll need to be prepared for scrutiny, for character attacks, for legal maneuvering designed to wear you down. I swallowed. I understand. She tapped her pen against the file. The facts are strong. The documentation is clear. Your grandparents' intentions are well established, and the power of attorney appears to have been obtained through misrepresentation. She paused. There are grounds to move forward, but I could hear it, something unspoken. I leaned in, but her tone didn't soften. But these cases are never simple. They're slow, painful, expensive, and they will bleed you long before they bleed them. The burden of proof will be on you, Catherine said evenly, to demonstrate that your father's actions were a breach of fiduciary duty, not a reasonable reallocation of family resources. I blinked. Even though the documents name me as the sole beneficiary, he'll argue the power of attorney gave him authority to make financial decisions on your behalf, she replied. He'll frame the transfers as an investment in the family's collective future. Her tone turned clinical. A future physician versus an architect. It stung, even though I'd already rehearsed that defense myself during my pre-dawn breakdown. I leaned back in the leather chair and exhaled through my nose. So, you're saying I should let it go, accept the theft, and say thank you? Catherine's expression softened just a hair, saying you should understand what you're undertaking. This isn't just a lawsuit, it's a declaration of war on your family. Are you prepared for what that means? The question sat heavy in the air, soaked in implications. Could I expose secrets, sever ties, burn what was left of my relationship with Rebecca, who might be guilty only of being the chosen one? I need time, I admitted, feeling the weight of it settle into my bones. Catherine nodded. That's wise. This is not a decision you make in the heat of anger. I nodded back, tight-lipped. My next two consultations with Gabriel Martinez and Diane Lockhart delivered similar reality checks. They didn't sugarcoat it. I had a strong case, a compelling one, but dragging a federal judge, my father, into court would not be clean or quick. Each firm had their own plan, their own take on timelines and risk, but they all asked, in their own way, if I was ready to trade my family name for justice. By evening, I had 3 legal strategies, 3 possible paths forward, and 1 massive decision to make. I walked home as the sun dipped behind the skyline, casting gold onto glass and steel while my phone buzzed with a new message. Olivia, please call us. We're worried, followed by another. Your sister comes home this weekend. Let's do Sunday dinner. I'm making your favorite. Pot roast? Pot roast? As if that made up for betrayal. As if a roast could mop up the stain of stolen millions. They knew exactly what they'd done. They knew where every dollar went and why I'd had to survive off rice and budget toothpaste while Rebecca lived like royalty under the guise of academia. And now they were inviting me back into the theater, asking me to play the loyal, supporting character again like nothing ever happened. Standing on that street corner, I made one decision. If not about litigation, then about truth. I would no longer pretend this family ran on fairness. I would no longer accept their well-packaged lies as love. I replied with a single word, no. Then I powered off my phone. That night I picked up my pen, not to draft a timeline of betrayal, but a new design. A plan, a blueprint for autonomy, one rooted in my value, not their limitations. The golden cage they built for me, the one that rewarded obedience with crumbs and called it structure, had a door wide open now. The question wasn't whether I'd leave, it was how far I'd go once I stepped out. Sunday loomed like a bad forecast. After my one-word text, my mother called repeatedly, voicemails morphing from gentle concern to guilt-drenched confusion to that chilly command voice she used when society eyes were watching. My father sent one text, family matters should be discussed in person, we expect you Sunday. It didn't read like a request, it read like a court summons. I spent the week preparing like I was going into battle. I requested my credit reports clean until the deception began. I increased my 401k contributions, a symbolic middle finger of financial autonomy. I checked tenant laws, confirming that no matter what fallout hit, they couldn't take my home. Every action was a brick in the foundation of the life I was now designing. My life, not the blueprint they dictated. By Sunday morning, I had made my decision about legal action. Yes, I would pursue recovery, but only after one final chance for them to acknowledge what they did, to own it, to apologize. Naive, probably, but necessary. Because if I didn't offer that final olive branch, even just symbolically, I'd always wonder if I had skipped the one chance they had to be human. I dressed with care. Charcoal pencil skirt, white blouse, hair pinned into a sleek knot. Not a daughter playing nice. A professional woman in full command. I wore the pendant my grandmother left me, the one etched with the words, build with integrity. The drive to Lakeshore Heights felt surreal. Every turn of the wheel, a memory. But I wasn't going home. I was entering a courtroom where love and loyalty were finally going to be cross-examined. Every turn of the drive brought a memory clawing its way back up, each one now suspicious, each one now suspect. The elementary school where I'd won the science fair with a homemade solar panel project, reframed. Did they praise me because they were proud or because it made them look good at PTA meetings? The park where my father taught me to ride a bike. Maybe that was just baseline parenting, not bonding. The library where I spent hours studying while my mother smiled for charity luncheons. Independence or exile. Had my whole life been built on a quiet understanding that I'd never outshine Rebecca, or worse, that I didn't deserve to? By the time I reached the house, an imposing colonial at the end of a perfectly coiffed cul-de-sac, I had more questions than answers. My 7-year-old Toyota looked like a delivery vehicle parked behind their lineup of gleaming luxury cars, my father's black Audi, my mother's silver Mercedes, and now a red BMW convertible with plates that practically screamed Stanford Princess. The front door opened before I could knock. My mother stood there in full performance mode, air kiss ready, lips glossed, judgment behind her eyes. Olivia, darling, finally. We were starting to worry. Caroline Langford, age 58, still looked like the polished socialite magazine editorials were made for. Perfect blonde blowout, toned arms courtesy of boutique Pilates, and clothes so expertly tailored they made her look ageless. Hello, Mother, I said, returning her air kiss with the enthusiasm of someone greeting their tax auditor. I said I wouldn't come, but I imagined my absence was more inconvenient than my presence. She blinked, lips tightening. Don't be difficult, Olivia. Your sister's home, your father's been working too hard, and we wanted a pleasant family meal. Is that too much to ask? The irony of her suggesting I was the one disrupting family harmony nearly choked me. Depends what else you plan on asking, I replied, brushing past her and into the house like a polite hurricane. My father stepped out of his study, newspaper folded, glasses perched low on his nose like he was halfway between analyzing court precedent and pretending not to see emotional conflict. Olivia, good of you to join us. His tone sounded more like a judge acknowledging a late witness than a father greeting his daughter. Your sister just got in. She's freshening up. No hug, not even a pat on the back, just courtroom energy wrapped in Brooks Brothers. Judge Langford, I said, letting the formality hang in the air like gunpowder. His gaze tightened slightly at the omission of Dad, but he let it go. The living room was unchanged. Perfect beige tones, tastefully framed photos, and yet everything looked different now. I moved straight to the side table where the family photos lived in sterling silver frames. Rebecca in her white coat, Rebecca on a yacht, Rebecca with our parents at her graduation. My own face made brief cameos, a firm headshot, one Christmas dinner, a distant echo of architectural school. Your firm's project was mentioned in Design Quarterly, my father said, pouring himself a scotch. The mixed-use development on the riverfront. They mentioned sustainability. Yes, I said, eyes still on the photos. Though they didn't credit the junior team who actually developed the sustainable materials strategy, I turned to him. I have always believed people should be recognized for their actual contributions. Don't you? He paused, just for a beat. But I caught it. Recognition comes with time and position, Olivia. You know that. And some positions are more deserving of recognition and support than others. He didn't answer right away. Career advancement follows predictable patterns. Patience is key. So is honesty and fiduciary responsibility. Or does that only apply in your courtroom? The glass clinked sharply against the bar cart. If you have something to say, say it. I didn't raise you to speak in riddles. No, I said coolly. You raised me to never question authority, especially yours. Olivia, my mother said, her voice coated in saccharine ice. What's gotten into you? Was he paying me a compliment or reminding me to stay in my lane while more favored individuals receive immediate support? The silence in the room stiffened, broken only by footsteps on the stairs. Rebecca appeared like a well-timed pageant queen, blonde, glowing, wrapped in cashmere. Liv, she beamed. I've missed you. How's architecture? Still saving the planet one eco-building at a time. She stepped forward to hug me. I stepped back. Her smile wavered. The architecture world's tough when you're juggling student loans on a junior salary, I said. But you wouldn't know about that, would you? She blinked. What? Do you know where the money for your education came from, Becca? For your summers in Europe? For that car, that watch? She glanced at our parents. From Mom and Dad, obviously. Investments. Dad's salary. No, I said, voice low. Not from them. From me. Not the same place at all, I said coldly. My father set down his scotch with the calm precision of a man who knew a storm had just walked in wearing heels. Olivia, whatever concerns you have can be addressed privately. There's no need to create drama during a family dinner. Drama? I repeated, arching a brow. Is that what we're calling it now? When someone finds out they've been robbed of nearly $3 million by their own parents? The room fell silent. Rebecca looked like someone had slapped her with a frozen fish. My mother, in a move so cliche I almost laughed, actually clutched her pearls. But my father, ever the judge, was already calculating. You've spoken to William Kensington, he said flatly. Yes, I replied. Apparently, Grandma Eleanor's letter was supposed to reach me 3 years ago. Strange how that never happened. Letter? Rebecca asked, blinking. What letter? What's going on? I looked to my father. Would you like to explain, Judge Langford? Or shall I? He exhaled slowly, his tone practiced. Your grandmother had certain ideas about wealth distribution that were impractical and, frankly, detrimental to this family's long-term well-being. Impractical, I echoed. Is that your legal opinion? Because First Atlantic's legal team calls it something else. Misappropriation. My mother's voice sharpened. You don't understand the complexities. Really? I snapped. Because I understand that my student loan servicer knows my name better than half my coworkers, while Becca here got a Mercedes and a European summer for surviving finals week. Rebecca, now pale, sat down hard on the couch. I don't understand. What trust? What money? I turned to her, softening just a bit. Grandma and Grandpa left me a trust, nearly $3 million, 0 cents. I was supposed to get it at 25 or after grad school, but our parents rerouted it to you piece by piece using a power of attorney I signed without knowing what it was. Her eyes widened. No, that can't be. Mom, Dad? It's not that simple, my father started, defaulting to courtroom calm. Resources must be allocated based on potential return. Rebecca's medical career is an investment in your favorite daughter, I cut in. Just say it. You decided long ago which one of us was worth it, and when the numbers didn't reflect your narrative, you rewrote them. You're making this sound malicious, my mother said, tone defensive. We were thinking of the family's welfare. Were you? I said, stepping toward them. Or were you just making damn sure that your golden girl had everything while the other one was left to scrape by so she wouldn't get ideas above her station? Rebecca stood up. Stop it. Just stop. I never asked for any of this. I didn't know. I held up a hand. I know. This isn't about you, Becca. Not really. You were handed the crown before you knew there was a kingdom. This is about them, about the decisions they made and the daughter they deemed unworthy. I turned to my parents. I came here hoping, stupidly, that you might have a reason, something that made this betrayal make even a sliver of sense. My father's jaw tightened. You're being melodramatic. Financial decisions must be made pragmatically. It wasn't personal. It was illegal, I shot back. The trust was mine. It was designated in writing. You made unauthorized transfers. That's fraud, and you know it. His voice dropped to ice. Be careful, Olivia. Accusations have consequences, especially ones you can't substantiate. I calmly reached into my bag and laid out the documentation. The trust, the transfers, my grandmother's letter. I can substantiate everything. The only question is whether I'll need to do it in court. The room froze. Sunday dinner had officially become a war room. You'd sue us? My mother asked, voice shaking. Destroy your father's name? Our family? I met her eyes. This family was destroyed the minute you decided one daughter was an investment and the other a burden. I gathered my documents and faced the people I once called home. I'm giving you one chance to fix this. Restore the trust. Own what you did. Make amends. If not, I'll use every legal option I have, and I won't stop until the truth is public and my inheritance is restored. My father's face was stone. Think very carefully, Olivia. Litigation is unpredictable, painful. Reputations don't recover. I looked him square in the eye. I've thought carefully. Have you? Because from where I stand, the only thing ruined here is your integrity. I turned and walked toward the door. Liv, wait! Rebecca called. Please, I didn't know. Can we talk? I paused. Her face was open, honest, scared. I know you didn't, I said quietly. But this isn't about you. It's about them. When you're ready to talk without their script in your mouth, call me. As I stepped out of the house I'd once thought was a sanctuary, I felt a strange combination of hollow and whole. The family I thought I had? Gone. But maybe it never existed, just a polished fiction built on control, secrecy, and selective love. And in its place, a blueprint for something real, something of my own design, a life that didn't depend on their approval or money or rewriting history. The architect in me knew no structure holds without truth as its foundation, and sometimes the first step to rebuilding is demolition. The following week unfolded with brutal clarity. I took another calculated day off work, my second absence ever, and met with Catherine Wu, the attorney whose approach I trusted most. She flipped through the trust documents, eyes sharp and focused. Your situation is clear, she said. Legally, this is textbook breach of fiduciary duty. The paper trail is robust, Catherine said, flipping through the documents like she was reviewing a business proposal instead of the ruins of my trust. The power of attorney was almost certainly obtained through misrepresentation. Then came the pause. I had already learned to listen for it. But, I prompted. Her pen stilled on the page. But your father is Judge Elliot Langford. His network within the judiciary is extensive. While he can't directly intervene in a case where he's personally involved, judges tend to protect their own. We should anticipate procedural delays, aggressive defense strategies, and pressure from places we can't always predict. I nodded. I'd already factored that in. I understand. What's our first step? Catherine's approach was surgical. We would start with a formal demand letter to my parents, requesting full restoration of the trust funds with interest. Behind that, a mountain of evidence collection to strengthen our case if this escalated to litigation. We need to build a complete behavioral timeline, she said, not just the money trail, the treatment pattern. When did it start? How deep does it go? So for several days, I became a forensic archaeologist of my own childhood. I requested old financial aid applications, both undergrad and grad, where my parents had declared income while quietly hoarding my inheritance. I combed through emails, discussions of money, encouragements, dismissals, expectations. I built spreadsheets. I lined up every disparity like courtroom exhibits. Birthday gifts, $500, 0 cents for a professional wardrobe at 20, versus Rebecca's 3-week European vacation, complete with yacht selfies. Dad discouraging me from a more prestigious grad school. Be practical, Olivia. Those loans will bury you. We can only do so much. His email to Rebecca in the same week. Don't worry about money, Becca. Your education is worth investing in. The favoritism wasn't subtle. It was engineered, layered, intentional. Their tone with her was reverent. With me, managerial. My master's in architecture was a luxury. Her medical degree was a sacred mission. The biggest revelation? Financial aid records, proving they had full knowledge of their fiduciary duty while claiming financial limitations to me with a straight face. When I laid out the entire digital archive for Catherine Wells' documents, annotated timelines, her expression shifted from analytical to something close to satisfaction. This strengthens your case considerably, she said. It proves pattern and intent, not just a few bad decisions. She tapped the screen. The contrast in how opportunity was framed for you versus Rebecca is particularly damning. Is it enough? I asked. In a normal case? Absolutely. In a case involving a federal judge? It gives us leverage. He won't want this becoming public record. The demand letter was drafted. It was blunt. It listed the trust violation, the evidence of misappropriation, and demanded full restoration of principal, interest, legal fees, and damages for breach of fiduciary duty. But before I signed off, I did something the attorney in me considered optional, but the daughter in me needed. I called Rebecca. She answered on the first ring. Liv, she said softly, like she'd been waiting. I've been trying to reach you. I know, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I'm calling because I'm about to initiate legal action against our parents. I wanted to speak with you first. The silence that followed felt like the edge of a cliff. They say it's complicated, she finally whispered, that there were financial arrangements you don't understand, that they were trying to do what's best for both of us long term. I'd been expecting that. The same carefully woven narrative that paints me as emotionally reactive and them as misunderstood visionaries. Do you believe that? I asked. Another pause, this one longer. I don't know anymore, she admitted. I never questioned where the money came from. I just accepted it because you were raised to believe you deserved it, I said calmly. And I was raised to be grateful for whatever crumbs they spared. Was it really that obvious? She asked, her voice breaking slightly. Were they really that blatant about favoring me? Not overtly, I said. The messaging was subtle, insidious. You were brilliant, exceptional, worth investing in. I was steady, practical, expected to survive on my own. These weren't just personality assessments, they were value judgments, and they decided everything. I heard the faint hitch in her breathing, that little crack that said this wasn't theoretical for her anymore. I didn't know, she murmured. You weren't meant to, I replied. That's how it works. We don't see the system we're born into until someone points it out. After a long pause, she asked, "What happens now?" Now, I said, they'll receive a formal demand letter. It will spell out everything: the breach, the evidence, the amount owed. They can respond and try to resolve it, or they can ignore it and face what comes next. They'll have 14 days to respond before we file a civil suit, Catherine said crisply, sliding the finalized demand letter across her desk. And what about my education money? Rebecca asked hesitantly. The funds they've already spent on Stanford? There it was, the unspoken fear underneath all her guilt. She was 3 years into one of the most elite medical programs in the country. If our parents had simply told me, "Hey, Olivia, we want to use part of your trust to help with Becca's tuition," we could have had an honest conversation about family priorities, I might have agreed. But instead, they lied. They stole. They watched me struggle while they made champagne toasts with my future. They're terrified, Rebecca whispered. Dad hasn't slept. Mom's crying all the time. They think you're going to destroy everything. They already did, I said evenly. They destroyed the foundation trust is built on long before I knew about the money. Another pause. Then, can we meet? Just us? I need to hear everything. They're not telling me the truth. We met the next evening at a cafe halfway between our apartments, neutral territory like a ceasefire summit between warring nations. Rebecca was already there, seated in the corner, no makeup, hair in a ponytail, designer wardrobe replaced by jeans and a sweatshirt. She looked like my sister again, just younger, less curated. I brought these, she said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were detailed payment records from Stanford. Over $320,000, 0 cents had been paid toward her medical education, every cent from a trust account matching my grandparents' bequests. I had no idea, she said, her voice tight. I thought it was coming from their savings. They always said money for education was non-negotiable. For you, I said quietly. Not for me. Her eyes filled with tears. I see that now. I see a lot of things I didn't let myself see before. I thumbed through the documents, mentally slotting each payment into my growing timeline of betrayal. These will help the case, I said. Thank you. I can't testify, Rebecca blurted, dabbing at her cheeks. I can't go to court and speak against them, but I can't pretend this is okay either. What they did to you was deeply wrong. I'm not asking you to testify, I said. These documents already speak volumes. She reached out slowly, placing her hand over mine. What can I do to make this right between us? I didn't answer immediately. I had been so focused on restitution and litigation, I hadn't stopped to consider reconciliation. I don't know, I admitted. It's hard to process what it means, knowing everything I was denied, funded, everything you received. I can't undo my education, she said softly. I can't give back what's already spent. No, and I wouldn't ask you to, I said. That's not the point. Then what is? She asked, eyes wide and pained. What do you want from me? I looked at her. Really looked. Not as the golden child, but as someone who had been shaped by the same manipulation, just from the other side. I want you to see me, I said, as someone worthy, just like you. Rebecca's face crumpled. I always did, she whispered. You were the one who had it together. You were so confident. I was terrified I'd never be enough. I thought you didn't need anything. The irony nearly knocked me back. What she'd seen as strength had been compliance. What she called confidence had been conditioning. I wasn't sure, I admitted. I just believed I wasn't allowed to want more. We talked for hours, comparing childhood memories, decoding our parents' doublespeak from both ends of the hierarchy. The conversation was raw and exhausting, but illuminating. Rebecca had been weighed down by pressure. I'd been clipped by restraint. Both of us had been shaped by the same chisel. We parted with a fragile understanding. Not full reconciliation, but a new blueprint. One that wasn't based on our parents' fiction. I'll help however I can, she said as we stood to leave. I can't take their side. Not now. The next morning, Catherine sent the demand letter. By that afternoon, my father's attorney had called. They want to meet, Catherine told me. To discuss settlement options? Already? I asked, startled. Either they're terrified of publicity or they're trying to stall and hide assets. We've filed temporary injunctions, she replied. If they're pushing for a settlement, it's because they know they're exposed. The meeting was set for the following week. In the meantime, I threw myself back into work, except now, I wasn't the same person who quietly accepted credit going elsewhere. I spoke up. I pushed back. In design meetings, I argued for sustainable innovations I once let be tabled for future consideration. Marcus, the senior architect who had brushed off my reclaimed timber pitch 3 months ago, now found himself outmatched by my data. "You've changed," he said after one heated debate. "You would have backed down before." "I used to think deference would be rewarded with recognition," I replied. "Now I know better. Value isn't given, it's claimed." And it didn't stop at work. I began looking into advanced certifications I used to think were out of reach. I signed up for an evening course in urban sustainability. I sketched concepts for projects I actually cared about, for communities, not corporations. Um, every move I made felt like I was reclaiming something bigger than money. I was rebuilding potential that had been quietly stolen by a lifetime of subtle sabotage. As the settlement meeting approached, I prepared myself not just for legal arguments, but for emotional ones. Dressed in suits and veiled disappointment, I wasn't just walking into a negotiation. I was walking into the final confrontation with the version of myself they had always expected me to be. My parents would be present, along with their attorney, Lawrence Brennan, a silver-haired relic from my father's early years in private practice. A man who once called my father the sharpest mind in litigation and now represented him in a suit filed by his own daughter. Catherine had prepped me thoroughly, remained silent for most of the meeting. Let her handle the technicals. My only focus should be outcome, full restoration of the trust. "This isn't about reconciliation," she reminded me, voice cool and firm. "It's about remedy. Keep your emotions in check and let the evidence speak for itself." Sound legal advice. But as I laid out my clothes for the meeting, tailored navy blazer, pressed slacks, a white blouse, and my grandmother's silver pendant, I understood this wasn't just about restitution. It was my formal exit from a family structure that had never seen me clearly, my rejection of the obedient narrative I'd been assigned. I wasn't walking into a law office. I was walking into liberation. Brennan, Woodward, and Shaw occupied the 37th floor of a downtown tower designed to intimidate. Their lobby could have doubled as a modern art museum. Polished stone, impossibly high ceilings, abstract paintings chosen for price over meaning. The reception area overlooked the city like Olympus. The message was clear. Power lives here, and it does not like to be challenged. Catherine Wu looked unimpressed as we were led to conference room C by a sharply dressed assistant whose heels echoed like punctuation. "Standard theater," she muttered. "They're counting on the setting to make you more agreeable." "It won't," I replied, sweeping my gaze across the rosewood table, leather chairs, an artisanal water station, all curated to evoke prestige. Once that would have worked on me. Not anymore. "We arrived first. Catherine's calls small psychological advantages matter," she'd said. "Let them walk into your terms." I reviewed the evidence again, even though I knew it by heart. This wasn't for accuracy, it was for focus, control, emotional armor. At exactly 2:00 p.m., the door opened. Lawrence Brennan entered first, exuding decades of courtroom polish and effortless authority. His Brooks Brothers suit practically carried its own resume. He was followed by my father, all judicial control and no warmth. He moved like a man who owned every room, except this one. My mother came last, her expression composed into dignified sorrow. Her tailored navy dress and pearl earrings spoke of wealth wrapped in modesty. Her Hermes scarf, soft lilac silk, matched her attempt at restraint. Rebecca was notably absent. I'd expected her, maybe in a misguided show of support for our parents, maybe to offer a last-ditch effort at diplomacy. Her absence said everything. She had chosen the only safe option: distance. No introductions, no greetings. Brennan sat directly across from Catherine, placing his monogrammed leather portfolio on the table with precision. "Before we begin," he said, voice slick as glass, "this meeting is being conducted as a good faith negotiation, subject to standard confidentiality provisions. Nothing said here constitutes an admission of liability or wrongdoing by my clients." Catherine nodded, calm but sharp. "Understood. Though given the nature of the evidence in our possession, I'd say the question of wrongdoing is rather settled." Brennan's jaw flexed. "Miss Wu, inflammatory characterizations will not facilitate productive discussion." "Neither will pretense," she replied smoothly. "The facts are clear. Judge Elliot Langford and Mrs. Caroline Langford diverted approximately $5 million from a trust explicitly established for Miss Olivia Langford's benefit. They did so using a power of attorney document obtained through misrepresentation. The funds were transferred to accounts benefiting their younger daughter, Rebecca Langford, without Olivia's knowledge or consent." My father cleared his throat, preparing to speak, but Brennan held up a hand. "Elliot, please, let me handle this." My father went rigid, visibly swallowing the insult of being told to stay quiet in his own defense. His jaw ticked, but he said nothing. My mother, meanwhile, reached for the glass water service, pouring herself a drink with a trembling hand. The sound of ice clinking against crystal was the only thing moving in the heavy silence. My clients acknowledge, Brennan continued, returning to his polished tone, that certain financial decisions were made regarding family resources. These decisions were made with the family's best interest in mind, balancing immediate educational needs with long-term financial stability. Catherine raised an eyebrow. Family resources, she echoed, her tone as sharp as a scalpel. The Eleanor and Robert Langford Trust was explicitly established for Olivia Langford's benefit, Catherine said sharply. It was not a family slush fund to be reallocated according to Judge Langford's personal preferences, Brennan countered smoothly. The trust was created when Ms. Langford was an infant. Her grandparents could not have anticipated the specific educational or professional paths their granddaughters would take. As trustees, Judge and Mrs. Langford had the responsibility to interpret the trust purpose in light of evolving circumstances. Catherine said nothing at first. Instead, she opened her portfolio and removed a document protected in a clear sleeve. Perhaps this will clarify the grantor's intentions, she replied, sliding it across the table. Eleanor Langford's written instructions, to be given to Olivia upon assuming control of the trust, leave no room for ambiguity. My father didn't move. He didn't need to. He'd clearly read it before. He had chosen to hide it. My mother, however, reached for it with a slow, trembling hand. Her eyes scanned her own mother's handwriting, and I watched the color drain from her face. You weren't supposed to see this yet, she whispered, forgetting, perhaps deliberately ignoring that we were in a legal negotiation. Brennan shot her a hard, warning glance, but it was too late. The truth was out. Clear, undeniable. They had intentionally withheld the letter and access to the trust until my sister's needs were covered. My grandmother's wishes had been ignored. My inheritance hijacked. Let's be practical, Brennan said, attempting a tactical shift. What is it you want, Olivia? Surely not a drawn-out legal battle that could irreparably damage your family, and certainly not a public spectacle that could harm your father's reputation and, by extension, your own professional credibility. There must be a private resolution that satisfies all parties. Before Catherine could speak, I leaned forward. What I want, I said, voice steady and even, is everything that was taken from me. Every dollar. With interest. I want formal acknowledgement of the wrongdoing. I want assurance that my sister's education will not be impacted by the correction of this injustice. And I want it resolved privately, not to protect my father's reputation, but to spare my grandparents the shame of having their legacy so thoroughly violated by their son. My father's composure finally cracked. This is absurd, he snapped. You speak as though we stole from you, as though we acted with malice instead of judgment. We made decisions based on needs, on potential outcomes. Her medical education is no more valuable than my architectural career, I cut in. But that's the fallacy at the core of your logic. You made that decision long before either of us had proven anything. You decided her path was worth full support. Mine, just enough to function. She supported your education, my mother argued weakly. My undergraduate degree was funded largely by merit scholarships, I said. My graduate program? Financed through loans I'm still repaying. Meanwhile, Rebecca has never filled out a FAFSA or done a single debt calculation in her life. That disparity wasn't about necessity. It was design. These family dynamics, Brennan interjected, attempting to steer the conversation back into his control, are emotionally significant, yes, but legally irrelevant. Let's return to settlement terms. What exactly are you asking for to avoid litigation? Catherine spoke now, crisp and controlled. Full restoration of the diverted funds plus 6% annual interest. Assignment of an independent trustee to manage the restored assets, reimbursement for all legal fees incurred, and a formal acknowledgement of breach of fiduciary duty. My father scoffed. This is extortion. But before anyone else could respond, my mother broke the silence. No, Elliot, she said softly, it's accountability. Everyone at the table turned. She looked at me, truly looked at me, for what felt like the first time in years. We convinced ourselves we were making responsible decisions, she said, that allocating more resources to Rebecca was sound judgment, that she needed more support, that Olivia would manage, that she always did. We never examined why we believed she deserved less. My father blinked in visible disbelief. Caroline, this is neither the time nor the place. It's exactly the time, she replied firmly. Before we bury this in legal language and settlements, before we rewrite the past again, let's just tell the truth. She turned to me. We favored Rebecca. We always have. We rationalized it. We said she was more vulnerable, that her field was more demanding. But the truth is uglier. We gave her more because she reflected what we wanted. We conditioned you to take less, to want less, and then we convinced ourselves you were content with that. The room was dead silent. Catherine maintained her composure, but I saw the flash of surprise in her eyes. She hadn't expected this. Neither had I. My father's face turned red, whether from rage or shame, I couldn't tell. "This is wildly inappropriate," he barked. "We're here to resolve a financial matter, not conduct group therapy." "The financial decisions were the therapy," my mother said, her voice rising in strength. "They were the manifestation of our values. Olivia deserves truth, not spin. I won't ask for forgiveness. What we did was wrong. Not just the theft, but the subtle daily messages that told you to expect less, that you were less. I see it now, and I am so sorry." Her words hit like a physical blow. I had braced myself for cold legal positioning, gaslighting, dismissal. I had not prepared for this, contrition, and not from the person I expected. "Caroline, that's enough," my father warned, his voice firm. "This conversation is over." "No, Elliot," she said, standing taller than I'd ever seen her. "It's not over, not until it's acknowledged." She turned to Brennan, her voice clear. "We accept the terms. The funds will be restored, with interest. Legal fees will be covered. The formal acknowledgement will be issued." Brennan looked to my father, clearly expecting him to override my mother's unexpected surrender. But Judge Elliot Langford seemed to finally recognize the crumbling foundation of his position. With the evidence laid bare, his wife defecting mid-negotiation, and his daughter staring him down with unrelenting resolve, there was nowhere left to hide. Just one move remained: strategic surrender. "Draft the agreement," he said tersely to Brennan. "We'll settle." Catherine gave a slight nod, satisfaction flickering across her otherwise professional expression. "Wise decision. We'll need the first transfer of funds within 5 business days as a show of good faith." "Fine," my father clipped. "Is there anything else?" I looked at him directly for the first time since he'd entered the room. This man who had defined justice and duty in my life, who taught me the meaning of law and order, while quietly rewriting both in his personal sphere. The man who spent years reinforcing my sister's entitlement while dismantling mine. The man who called theft stewardship and favoritism pragmatism. "Yes," I said, voice low but unwavering. More thing. I want you to look me in the eye and tell me the truth. If I hadn't discovered the trust, would you have ever told me? Or would you have continued redirecting the funds until nothing remained?" He held my gaze. I saw the calculation flickering behind his eyes, balancing truth against control, honesty against legacy. "We would have told you eventually," he said, "once Rebecca's education was fully funded, once the most pressing needs were covered." "And how much would have been left for me at that point?" I asked. He paused. "Enough," he offered. A reasonable portion of my inheritance," I echoed. "How generous of you." My mother reached across the table, hesitating just before making contact with my hand. "Olivia, I know this doesn't undo anything, but I need you to know. I see now how wrong we were. Not just about the money, about everything, how we supported you, what we expected from you, what we convinced you to expect from yourself." I pulled my hand slightly back, not out of cruelty, but because forgiveness takes time. "You're right," I said. "It doesn't change what happened, but it's a start." The meeting ended with arrangements to finalize the settlement. Documents would be drafted, reviewed, and signed. As Catherine and I gathered our files, my father tried to reframe the ending. "I hope you'll consider the impact this will have on your sister. Rebecca's education shouldn't suffer for our mistake." "I've already spoken with Rebecca," I said calmly. "She understands what happened better than you seem to. And unlike you, I don't believe in punishing one daughter to benefit another. Her education will continue. The difference is that now it will be funded transparently with her consent, not through deception and theft." As we rode the elevator down from the upper floors of that glass and steel fortress, I felt lighter, not because the fight was over, but because the weight I'd carried wasn't mine anymore. "That went better than expected," Catherine said. "Your mother's honesty, unusual. Family disputes don't usually include full-throated confessions." "She surprised me, too," I admitted. "I always thought of her as an echo of my father, not someone capable of seeing past the script." "People surprise you," Catherine replied, "especially when confronted with undeniable proof of their failures. But the real question is, where do you go from here? The money's being restored. What about the relationships?" That was the question I'd been dodging. What kind of relationship, if any, could I build or rebuild with parents who betrayed me for years, with a sister who, however unintentionally, reaped the benefits of that betrayal? I don't know yet, I said honestly. Restoration isn't the same as reconstruction. As we stepped into the bright afternoon sun, I realized something that left me breathless. For the first time in my adult life, I was truly free, not just financially, psychologically, free from the invisible chokehold of conditional love, free from a family system designed to limit me, free from a narrative built on scarcity where my dreams were always too expensive to matter. The architect in me recognized this as something more profound than a renovation. This wasn't restoration, it was site prep, a demolition of false narratives. The ground had been cleared, the scaffolding of deception was gone. What I would build now, that was mine to decide. My vision wasn't fully formed, but it stretched far beyond restitution. It included the career I didn't pursue, the ideas I didn't chase, the dreams I shelved because I'd been told repeatedly that they weren't realistic, because I believed I didn't deserve more. But I did. I always had. As I stepped into the life I would now design for myself, I carried something even more valuable than the restored trust. The truth that I had always been worthy. Worthy of opportunity, worthy of belief, worthy of investment. The trust fund was being rebuilt. But the greater trust, my belief in myself, had already been reconstructed, and it was stronger than before. The settlement agreement was executed with surprising speed. Within 3 weeks, the first transfer posted to the new trust account, $1,200,000, 0 cents reclaimed from investment vehicles my father had used to bury the stolen inheritance. The remaining $1,300,000, 0 cents, plus calculated interest, would follow in 2 installments over the next month. Catherine had insisted on an independent trustee, someone with no ties to the Langford family, to manage the assets during the transition. Jordan Lawson, a trust specialist with an impeccable ethical reputation, was appointed to oversee the process. His professionalism stood in stark contrast to the secrecy I had endured. He provided weekly updates with a level of transparency I hadn't known to expect. The second transfer is scheduled for Friday, he told me during our third call. Another $800,000, 0 cents, plus applicable interest. It will be coming from your sister's trust account, which is being proportionally reduced, not eliminated. This arrangement preserves sufficient capital to complete her medical education without additional loans, Jordan explained. I had demanded that clause, not out of concern for my parents' financial well-being, but to ensure Rebecca wouldn't suffer disruption in her education due to their misconduct. She didn't ask to be the beneficiary of their betrayal. This compromise struck a careful balance, reclaiming what was stolen from me without punishing her for what she didn't know. And the acknowledgement of breach? I asked, referencing the formal statement my parents had agreed to submit. It's been drafted and is undergoing final review by their counsel, he replied. Miss Wu is coordinating that directly. The legal restoration of my inheritance was proceeding with machine-like precision. Paperwork, wire transfers, and clauses flowed efficiently through the system, repairing my financial future in a way that felt orderly and contained, but the emotional aftermath didn't follow a template or schedule. It was chaotic, disorienting, and slow-burning. As the adrenaline of confrontation wore off, I found myself unraveling in quiet moments. For all their flaws, my family had provided a structure, rigid and toxic, yes, but familiar. Now that scaffolding had collapsed, and I felt suspended between 2 realities, the one I believed in and the one I now saw with unfiltered clarity. The disorientation manifested physically. Nights of restlessness followed by days of exhaustion, appetite swings, even momentary confusion. In familiar places, my body, it seemed, had begun processing the trauma my brain had locked away during the legal firestorm. This is normal, said Dr. Elise Sharma, the therapist I'd recently begun seeing. In our third session, she regarded me with calm certainty. You're not just mourning the betrayal of your parents. You're mourning the loss of a worldview. The story you believed about your family, your value, your place in their narrative, it's all being rewritten. That's disorienting at a core level. I should feel vindicated, I admitted, eyes fixed on the swirling blue and gray abstract painting behind her. I won. The money's coming back. They admitted what they did. But all I feel is hollow. Dr. Sharma nodded. That's because vindication doesn't replace the unconditional love and support you should have received. You've achieved justice, but justice doesn't heal betrayal. That's a different journey. I shook my head slowly. Every memory feels tainted now. Every career suggestion, every comparison to Rebecca, every comment about being the practical daughter, it all feels like part of a lie. Like I was steered into a version of myself that served their narrative better than it served me. Dr. Sharma leaned forward. Start by acknowledging that what you sensed all along that things weren't fair, that was real. The feelings of imbalance, of being treated as less worthy, those weren't misunderstandings. Your parents needed your compliance and they secured it by making you question your own instincts. Hearing that out loud was both relieving and devastating. I had buried years of subtle favoritism under the weight of their rationalizations. Rebecca needed more support. Medicine was noble. Architecture was nice. Her ambitions would help the world. Mine were interesting hobbies. And I'd accepted that. I let them convince me my dreams were indulgent, I said quietly, that my desire to pursue regenerative architecture was idealistic nonsense, that environmental design was something to dabble in after I'd proven myself in the real world. And now that you understand their assessments were biased, Dr. Sharma prompted, what changes in how you see your path? The question peeled something open in me. I think I've been building a career on their blueprint, not mine. I say it told me to be practical, and I listened. I joined a firm that sidelines sustainability because deep down, I didn't think I had the right to challenge the status quo. And if you believed your potential was limitless the way they treated your sisters was, she asked, what would you pursue then? I exhaled slowly, the truth landing in my chest like a long lost blueprint. Advanced training in regenerative architecture. I said, not just green buildings, buildings that reverse environmental damage, that heal ecosystems, that make the world better. That's what I've always wanted, but I packed it away because they made me feel like it was naive, like I didn't earn the right to aim that high. They didn't say you couldn't, Dr. Sharma said, but they made you question if you should. I nodded. Exactly. And even now, after all this, I've still been limiting myself out of habit. Their approval is no longer a factor, but their conditioning lingers. That's what deep conditioning does, she said. Even when external control ends, internal constraints remain. The bars are gone, but you still pace the cage. And she was right. The theft of my trust fund had a ledger and interest rates and attorneys. But the deeper theft, the quiet erosion of my self-worth, my ambition, my belief in what I was allowed to dream, that couldn't be quantified. That couldn't be reimbursed. So what now? I asked. The money's coming back, but how do I get the rest back? The confidence, the vision I let go of? The same way you reclaimed your trust, she said, with deliberate awareness of what was taken, how it was taken, and active choices to restore it. But this time, the court is inside you. The process is internal. That sounds massive, I admitted. It is, she agreed. But you've already started. You've named it. You've begun to challenge it. The question now is, how far are you willing to go to reclaim the rest? As I walked out of her office and into the light of a crisp afternoon, the question rang in my ears with clarity. For once, I wasn't focused on what they'd taken. I was focused on everything I could still take back. The settlement would soon be finalized, the legal fight resolved, and the money that should have always been mine was now in the process of being fully restored. But the deeper loss, the intangible theft of my aspirations, my confidence, my sense of boundless possibility, was still unresolved. How could I reclaim those pieces of myself? The ones eroded not by a single act of fraud, but by years of subtle discouragement and strategic neglect. The answer began to take shape not in a courtroom or a spreadsheet, but while walking past a modest gallery showcasing architectural designs focused on urban renewal. In its window was a poster for an upcoming lecture series on regenerative design by Helena Rosenthal, a pioneer in the field I had long admired from a cautious, self-limiting distance. Without hesitation, I stepped inside and approached the receptionist. Is registration still open for the Rosenthal lecture series? I asked. She glanced up. It is, but space is limited. They're capping attendance at 30 participants due to the workshop format. I'd like to register, I replied, pulling out my credit card, a small act that felt like a massive, deliberate reclamation of the future they had told me not to want. Later that evening, I received a text from Rebecca. Mom told me about the second transfer. Are you okay with everything? Can we talk soon? My relationship with my sister remained complicated, a careful dance between acknowledging her as a passive beneficiary of our parents' betrayal and recognizing that she too had been shaped by the same manipulative system, just from the favored end. Since the start of the settlement process, our conversations had been brief and strictly logistical. I stared at the message, weighing the emotional cost of opening that door again. The simplest path would be to keep my distance, to protect my fragile healing with silence. But I was beginning to understand that isolation could be just as limiting as the favoritism I'd escaped. I'm okay. Things are proceeding as agreed. Yes, we can talk. Dinner tomorrow? Her reply was immediate. Name the place. I'll be there. We met the following night at a small Ethiopian restaurant halfway between our apartments, neutral ground with no familial baggage or memories. Rebecca had arrived first and secured a quiet corner table. She looked different than she had weeks ago, not frail, not broken, but stripped of the polish our parents had once funded. Her designer wardrobe was replaced by jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in an easy ponytail. Thanks for meeting me, she said as I took my seat. I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't sure I should, I admitted, but avoiding each other seems pointless when we're the only ones who really understand what happened to us. She nodded with quiet agreement. How are you, really, beyond the money and the paperwork? Her question felt genuine, and for the first time, I saw not the golden child, but another young woman trying to rebuild herself in the wake of a shattering truth. I feel like I'm in free fall, I confessed. Everything I thought I knew about our family, about myself, about what I deserved, it's all collapsed. I'm still trying to figure out who I am without that scaffolding. Her gaze softened. I understand more than you might think. Learning that my success came at your expense, that I benefited from money meant for you, it's forced me to question everything too. I wonder now if any of it was really mine, if I would have earned anything without their constant reinforcement. It's like my identity was built on their favoritism. Her vulnerability mirrored my own, the same confusion, the same identity crisis, just from opposite ends of the same lie. We had both been shaped by our parents' manipulation, I through starvation of potential, she through overindulgence and pressure to live up to the investment. I don't blame you, I said after a moment. You didn't know, you didn't create the system. She looked down, but I accepted it. I never asked questions. I never wondered why I had so much and you had so little. I took it as natural. I was complicit, through silence, through entitlement. I didn't question. Her admission caught me off guard, much like our mother's unexpected confession during the settlement meeting. I had braced for excuses, for defense mechanisms, for polite rewrites of history. I hadn't prepared for honesty. So, what now? She asked. Between us. Can we rebuild anything, or is it too late? I took a moment, measuring her words against the raw calculus of my own damage. I wasn't interested in resuscitating a sisterhood built on imbalance, wasn't willing to pretend that what we had before was real, but I wasn't ready to discard the possibility of something new either. I don't know, I answered truthfully, but I think if anything is going to happen between us, we need to stop trying to repair what was. That relationship was built on inequality. I'd rather build something new, something real. A visible wave of relief passed over her face. I'd like that, she said, to build something new. As we shared injera bread and the assortment of stews served family style on a single platter, our conversation gradually softened, moving from the heavy terrain of betrayal and fractured identity into something more grounded, real life, the now. Rebecca spoke about her medical studies, though this time with a self-awareness that hadn't existed before. She spoke not with entitlement, but with a developing understanding of how her journey had been made easier by privileges she once took for granted. I told her about registering for the Regenerative Design Lecture Series, a move that felt as symbolic as it was professional. It was a step toward reclaiming the future I had shelved, one I'd been told was too niche, too idealistic. You'd be amazing at that, she said with genuine warmth. I remember those sketches you used to draw, buildings that grew their own energy that fed back into the land. Even in high school, you were ahead of your time. Hearing that from her, that she had noticed and valued the part of me our parents had routinely dismissed, meant more than I expected. By the time we parted ways that night, something between us had shifted. Not quite reconciliation, but something more honest. A fragile, growing connection no longer shaped by unspoken hierarchies or performative civility. We weren't undoing the past. We were acknowledging it. That alone was progress. As I walked home through the warmth of a quiet evening, I became aware that the feeling of freefall had changed. I was still suspended from the identity that had once been so rigidly defined by my family's narrow expectations, but the terror of that drift was fading. In its place, a strange calm was emerging. It occurred to me that free fall wasn't just about losing your footing. It could also be flight. The ground I had lost wasn't worth returning to. It had been false, unstable, shaped by conditional love and carefully maintained illusions. What waited below wasn't a crash. It was a landing, one I would choose and design for myself. For the first time since William Kensington's early morning phone call detonated the myth of my family, I felt something unexpected taking root beneath the bitterness and exhaustion. A tentative, quiet sense of liberation. The final transfer arrived on a Wednesday morning in early October, $895,400. 0 cents plus accumulated interest deposited into the newly established trust account that would soon be under my full control. With that transaction, the settlement was complete. The inheritance that had been stolen, buried, and redirected without my knowledge was now fully restored. The legal victory had been swift, precise, and complete. Congratulations, Catherine Wu said over the phone. The final funds are now being processed for transfer into your direct management. Jordan will schedule one last meeting to review your long-term options. Thank you, I told her, though the words felt wholly insufficient. What she had helped me reclaim extended far beyond dollars. For everything. The hard part, she replied, wasn't the legal framework. It was standing up to your family. Most people would have settled for partial justice just to avoid the fallout. I couldn't compromise, I told her, because this wasn't just about money. It was about being seen as someone whose future mattered. Catherine's voice softened just slightly. Exactly why I took your case. You fought for your worth. Your grandparents would be proud. After we hung up, I sat in my office at Harmon and Associates, staring at Jordan Lawson's confirmation email. $2,700,000, 0 cents plus interest, now secured in full and preparing to shift into my name. The number was staggering, not just for what it represented financially, but for what it affirmed. Freedom from debt, from the anxious budgeting that had haunted every professional choice I'd made, from the sacrifices I had accepted without questioning whether they were necessary. It represented the undoing of a lie, that my future didn't justify real investment. My grandparents had thought otherwise, and now so did I. But with that freedom came a responsibility. What would I do with this resource? What would I build, not just in my life, but for the world? The questions followed me through the day like a quiet current, even as I reviewed construction documents for the mid-rise apartment complex that occupied most of my hours. It was a typical project, energy efficient, sure, but hardly revolutionary. Nothing about it aligned with the regenerative principles I had quietly championed and repeatedly watched sidelined as impractical or too expensive. Around noon, Marcus passed my desk and dropped a marked-up set of elevations onto my keyboard. Client wants traditional brick facing instead of the living wall system you pitched, says it's more marketable. I stared down at the red scribbles that rejected months of work. Months of data and research proving that the living wall would cut heating and cooling costs, improve air quality, and add biodiversity to an otherwise sterile footprint. The living wall would reduce HVAC usage by at least 18%, I said, keeping my voice steady. It improves resident health outcomes and pays for itself within 7 years. Marcus shrugged. Client doesn't care, brick sells. Make the changes by Thursday. As he walked away, something inside me shifted. Not rage, not despair, but clarity. A quiet internal click, like a lock springing open. For years, I had accepted these moments as part of the job. I had swallowed the firm's reluctance to back innovation the same way I had once accepted my parents' quiet message that my dreams were too indulgent to be real. Both stories had relied on the same underlying lie, that I should be grateful for whatever I was given because more was never mine to expect. The financial reality of my restored inheritance had already opened doors I never imagined would even appear, and now it was expanding possibilities in ways I was only beginning to comprehend. Back at my desk, I opened a browser and searched for Helena Rosenthal Regenerative Design. Her firm's website unfolded before me like a vision board I had once considered out of reach. The projects aligned perfectly with the dreams I'd tucked away for years. Buildings that produced more energy than they consumed, that filtered their own water, that acted as environmental stewards even within urban density. They weren't just sustainable, they were transformative. At the bottom of the site, a small notice caught my eye. Seeking experienced architect with passion for regenerative design principles to join our growing team. Based in Portland, hybrid work optional. My heart rate surged as I clicked through. The role was tailored to the very skill set I had been nurturing on my own time, after hours, weekends, and unpaid conference trips. And the application deadline was only a week away. I hesitated briefly, the reflexive caution of someone conditioned to fear instability tightening in my chest. Portland was across the country. The salary might be lower, the firm was smaller, less established, practical concerns. My parents' voice in my head, disguised as wisdom, began to whisper their familiar warnings. But then the newer voice, the one I was still getting used to, pushed back. I didn't need to cling to safety anymore. I could take risks without fear of ruin. My inheritance gave me that freedom, the very sort my sister had always enjoyed without question. I began assembling my application during lunch, gathering independent design work, sustainability proposals rejected by Harman and Associates, research I had pursued out of personal interest. By the time I returned to my desk, I had made my decision. Whether I was offered the job or not, it was time to leave Harman. The safety net my grandparents had provided transformed risk into opportunity. No longer reckless, but calculated. The kind of choice I had never been allowed to consider. I was in the middle of preparing my cover letter when my phone rang. An unknown Portland area code lit up my screen. For a moment, I simply stared, my fingers frozen over the keyboard. Coincidence? Providence? I picked up. Olivia Mercer speaking. Miss Mercer, this is Cole Washington with Rosenthal Design Partners, came a warm, slightly southern voice. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Not at all, I said, still reeling from the timing. How can I help you? Helena Rosenthal asked me to contact you directly. She attended your breakout presentation at last month's Sustainable Design Forum in Chicago and was very impressed, particularly with your work on natural water filtration systems for urban housing. I blinked, stunned. That forum trip had been entirely self-funded, taken on my personal time, and the session itself felt like a blip in the schedule, barely noticed. That's unexpected, I said slowly. I didn't know she was in the audience. Cole chuckled. Helena has a habit of attending under-the-radar sessions when she's scouting. She said your Q&A response about prioritizing regenerative functionality over traditional aesthetics perfectly captured our firm's philosophy. I took a breath, forcing myself to remain composed. I've followed Rosenthal's work for years. Her approach has shaped much of my thinking. Which is exactly why I'm calling, he said. We're opening a role for a project architect with your specific interests in water-integrated systems. Helena asked me to reach out before we post it publicly. The offer stunned me. Not just a job opportunity, but validation, alignment, the exact kind of work I'd been pushed away from for years, now actively sought out by someone who didn't owe me approval or encouragement. It was recognition that came not from obligation or blood, but merit. I'm very interested, I replied, steadying my voice. In fact, I was just preparing an application for a different role I saw on your website. Perfect timing then, Cole said. Would you be available for a video interview later this week? Helena would like to speak with you directly. We scheduled it for Friday morning. As I entered the call, I sat there in silence, feeling a strange current shift beneath me, like I'd finally stopped swimming upstream and the river was now carrying me forward. This wasn't just about luck, it was confirmation. Not the conditional praise of parents measuring you against a sister, but authentic recognition from someone who valued the kind of architect I actually was. That evening, I met with Jordan Lawson to complete the formal transition of the trust into my direct control. He presented investment options, recommended financial advisors who specialized in creative professionals, and detailed tax implications should I pursue a significant career change. Many clients in your position, suddenly receiving major assets after living independently, feel a pressure to change everything immediately, he explained calmly. My advice? Take your time. Don't rush just because you can. Let discernment guide you now, not urgency. This inheritance represents both opportunity and responsibility. How I chose to deploy it, Jordan reminded me, should reflect carefully considered priorities rather than reactive impulses. I told him I'd actually received an unexpected opportunity that very day, a call from Rosenthal Design Partners about a position that aligned perfectly with the specialized field I had always been passionate about. It would mean relocating to Portland, possibly taking a pay cut at first, but finally doing the kind of work that made sense to my soul. Jordan nodded thoughtfully, calm as always, telling me that this was precisely the kind of opportunity financial security made possible, prioritizing alignment and growth potential over short-term compensation. He reminded me that my restored assets provided a buffer, transforming what once would have been a financial cliff into a strategic leap. My parents would call it impractical, I noted, though the words didn't hit like they once did. He gave a diplomatic smile. With respect, your parents' financial judgment has proven questionable at best. Their sense of practicality seems focused more on maintaining control than on maximizing potential. That small, quiet rebuke from someone who knew numbers, not family drama, hit harder than any therapy session. Their advice was never about helping me succeed. It was about keeping me on rails they'd pre-laid, rails they'd never placed under my sister. Later that evening, back at my apartment, I found a slim, brown paper-wrapped box on my doorstep. No return address. Inside was a book, Regenerative Architecture, Designing for Healing, by Helena Rosenthal, and tucked between the pages, a handwritten note on cream-colored stationery. It read, Olivia, your work came to my attention at precisely the right moment. Our industry needs voices like yours, advocates who understand that true sustainability isn't about minimizing harm, but about creating systems that actively restore what's been damaged. I look forward to our conversation on Friday. In the meantime, this book outlines the principles that guide our practice. Your water integration concept suggests you're already thinking along similar lines. With appreciation for your perspective, Helena Rosenthal. I traced her signature with my fingers, stunned by the unexpected personal touch from someone I'd admired from afar for years. This wasn't just a professional courtesy. This was recognition, pure and unsolicited. It required no family connections, no politics, just man. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up until dawn reading every word of that book, finding in Helena's philosophy a roadmap for everything I had always believed architecture could be, but had never seen aloud. Her approach, ecological systems, community needs, aesthetic integrity, was the kind of coherent whole I'd only ever dreamed of being part of. It wasn't just about buildings. It was about healing of spaces, of people, of the disconnect between human habitation and the natural world. By the time morning light filtered through my windows, the decision had already been made. I would pursue the role at Rosenthal Design Partners no matter the pay cut. I would relocate to Portland if they offered it. My inheritance finally secured wasn't going to be a cushion for staying safe. It was going to be the launch pad for the life I was supposed to have, the one they tried to cut off at the knees. That Friday morning, I prepared for the interview with more clarity than I'd felt in years. I pulled together my portfolio, my real portfolio, work I had created outside of my firm's commercial demands, in stolen hours and on unpaid weekends. These were designs that spoke to my vision, not theirs. As I waited for the call to connect, I glanced at the framed letter from my grandmother. Use it wisely, but don't be afraid to use it joyfully. The screen lit up. There she was, Helena Rosenthal, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the kind of focused energy you can't fake. Olivia Mercer, she said, voice warm and grounded. Thank you for making time to speak with me. I believe we may have quite a lot to discuss about the future of regenerative design. And in that instant, I knew what this was. Not just an interview, not even just a job. This was a lifeline dropped into my hand at the exact moment I'd finally looked up and realized I was free to reach for it. The architect in me appreciated the symmetry, how the restoration of my inheritance and the emergence of a career opportunity I had once dared to dream about converged at the exact moment I was ready to rebuild. It felt intentional, like someone had finally handed me the blueprints to my own life after years of being told to make do with scraps. As I laid out my vision for water-integrated urban systems to Helena Rosenthal, the last stubborn threads of my parents' limiting narrative finally snapped. What emerged in their place was something far more powerful than the money I'd fought to reclaim or the title on a business card. It was conviction, quiet, grounding, immovable, that I had always been worthy. Worthy of investment. Worthy of ambition without apology. Worthy of a life defined by passion, not by my parents' rationed definition of practicality. That lifeline Helena extended hadn't been some stroke of luck. It appeared because I'd finally placed myself where I could grasp it, by reclaiming not just my money, but my right to define success on my own terms. The interview went far beyond the clocked hour. What started as a standard evaluation quickly morphed into an energetic deep dive into regenerative architecture. Helena's questions didn't just test technical skill, they interrogated belief systems. How should architecture respond to climate adaptation? What moral responsibility do we carry as designers for the social impact of our structures? How can buildings become not just shelters, but regenerative forces, active agents in environmental restoration? When she said, your perspective on water systems is particularly compelling, I felt it land. As the 2-hour mark approached, she observed, most architects treat water as a problem to solve. You treat it as an opportunity to create value, ecological, aesthetic, emotional. I nodded, then shared my screen and walked her through the designs I developed for urban housing projects. Designs that didn't just hide plumbing, but celebrated it. Flow became form. Movement became mood. The sound of water wasn't background. It was intention. It addresses function and invokes feeling, I told her. It connects infrastructure with human experience. Helena studied the images for a long moment, then said, these are sophisticated, especially coming from a firm like yours. Have any of these been implemented? I didn't even need to lie. No, I said flatly. At Harman and Associates, innovation lives on the whiteboard. These were developed outside office hours, independently. She nodded, unsurprised. That gap between what firms say about sustainability and what they actually approve for implementation, it's the reason we built our practice around clients who come to us for environmental leadership, not just to check boxes. By the end of the call, her interest had crystallized into a concrete offer. senior designer at Rosenthal Design Partners, based out of their Portland office, with full autonomy over their water integration strategies. It paid less than what I earned now, but came with profit sharing, leadership, and purpose. Actual purpose. We'll need a decision within 2 weeks, she said. You'd be joining our team for the Cascade Commons project. It's water positive, community integrated, your designs would be central. Everything I'd been told was unrealistic, impractical, beyond my station, was suddenly sitting across the table, waiting for my signature. I'm deeply interested, I said, feeling the old fear rise up and dissolve before it could take root. I just need time to work through the relocation. Helena smiled, understanding. Portland's market isn't the easiest, especially for newcomers. I'll have Cole send over some neighborhood insights and real estate leads we've used for other transplants. After we hung up, I just sat there, silent, processing. This wasn't just a job. This wasn't even about finally being seen. This was proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that my passion had value, that the system that had buried me under mediocrity wasn't a reflection of my ability, but of theirs. Helena had offered not a position, but a partnership, a chance to finally do the work I believed in, without asking for permission. As if the universe wasn't finished making a point, my phone buzzed with an email from Cole, Washington. An organized treasure trove of housing leads, relocation estimates, and contacts for local real estate agents. A second email followed moments later, this one from Jordan Lawson. The trust transition paperwork was complete. My inheritance, every last cent, was now under my full control. No more trustees, no more intermediaries, just me. Perfect timing, I muttered, knowing exactly what this was. The confluence of financial liberation and professional alignment. A blueprint, a launch sequence. That Monday, I asked for a meeting with Diane Harmon, founding partner of the firm that had spent years shelving my work. Her assistant looked at me like I'd grown a second head. Junior architects didn't just request audiences with the queen, but penciled me in anyway. I had 2 days. I used them wisely. I created transition documents, wrapped up outstanding deliverables, and prepped every handoff like I was leaving a legacy, not just a desk. When I walked into Diane's office that Wednesday afternoon, I was prepared. Her office, like her career, was built on clean lines and quiet power, offering panoramic views of a skyline she'd helped shape. Olivia, she greeted, puzzled but polite. What can I do for you? I've accepted an offer from Rosendahl Design Partners, I said calmly, placing my resignation letter on her desk. They've invited me to lead water integration strategies for their regenerative portfolio. I've also brought documentation for a full project transition. Her expression faltered. For the first time in our professional acquaintance, I saw something resembling surprise. Rosenthal's firm is interesting, she said, clearly scrambling for a response, but less established, more experimental. Have you considered the implications for your long-term stability? With respect, I replied, not flinching, my decision isn't about stability. It's about alignment. She studied me differently now, measuring, reassessing. I wasn't aware you had such a strong passion for regenerative systems. You've never spoken about that in leadership reviews. I gave a dry smile. I have, actually. The living wall proposal for Westridge, the rainwater filtration for Columbia Heights, passive cooling systems for the university project. All mine, all pitched, all rejected. Recognition flickered behind her eyes. Not denial, just a quiet acknowledgement of how things slip through the cracks when they come from someone lower on the ladder. That's unfortunate, she said finally. It's something we need to address. She offered to create a new position tailored to my interests, with proper credit and budget. 2 months ago, I would have cried with gratitude. Now, thank you, I said. But the difference is structural. Here, regenerative design is a marketing term. At Rosenthal, it's the foundation. That's where I need to be. We closed the meeting on polite, professional terms, but as I stepped out of her office, I felt 20 pounds lighter. The air felt easier to breathe. Whatever decision I ultimately made about Rosenthal's offer, I was determined to handle it with the professionalism that had defined my work from the beginning. Quiet, efficient, and unshakably thorough. On Wednesday, I walked into Diane Harmon's office at exactly 3:00 p.m., portfolio and transition documents in hand. Her corner office, an altar to 40 years of legacy builds and safe designs, overlooked a skyline of her own making. Olivia, she said with cordial curiosity. This is unexpected. What can I do for you? I placed my resignation letter on her desk without flinching. I've accepted an offer from Rosenthal Design Partners to lead water integration strategies for their regenerative projects. I've prepared full transition documentation to minimize disruption. Her expression flickered from surprise to calculation. At 62, she'd seen architects come and go, but losing a junior architect to a boutique firm with Rosenthal's rising clout clearly registered as more than just a staff change. Helena's operation is certainly innovative, she said, weighing her words, though smaller and less established. Have you thought about what that means for your career trajectory? I nodded, my voice calm. With respect, my decision isn't about stability or climbing a ladder. It's about aligning my work with my actual values around environmental design. She gave me a sharper look now, seeing me clearly for perhaps the first time. I didn't realize you felt so strongly about Rosenthal's methods. You've never brought that up in project meetings. My smile was tight. I have. The living wall system for Westridge, rainwater harvesting at Columbia Heights, passive cooling at the University Research Center, all backed by research, all cut for something cheaper or easier. Diane's face changed as she mentally sorted through the meetings. I thought those came from the sustainability consultants. They didn't, I replied. They were mine. The attribution wasn't always visible when it reached your level. Her silence spoke volumes, a dawning awareness that ideas could be lost, minimized, or claimed in the bureaucratic fog of a hierarchical firm. That's unfortunate, she said carefully, recovering her tone. It's something we should address. Perhaps there's a role we could create for you here, a dedicated regenerative systems lead, with recognition and resources to match. That offer would have felt miraculous 6 months ago, before William Kensington's 6 a.m. phone call shattered the fiction of my family's loyalty, before I unearthed the full scale of their betrayal and began rebuilding my self-worth from its broken foundation. Now, it was just another bandage over a bullet wound. Thank you, I said. But Rosenthal's approach isn't peripheral, it's central. I need to work where regenerative design isn't just a glossy section in the proposal deck, but the reason the client came to the firm in the first place. Diane nodded slowly. Fair. Though you should know, firms like ours do have more influence. Scale matters. It does, I acknowledged. But so does authenticity. And for now, I need to be somewhere that doesn't make me apologize for my passion. We ended the meeting with the kind of civility reserved for professionals who know the door doesn't swing back both ways. She accepted my resignation and wished me luck. And I walked out of that glass box, feeling the pressure lift. Subtle, persistent constraints I had tolerated for so long, I forgot they weren't part of the job. The next 2 weeks were a blend of surprise, speculation, and unsolicited career advice. Some colleagues congratulated me, clearly aware of Rosenthal's growing reputation. Others quietly questioned the wisdom of walking away from a stable trajectory for a firm focused on systems most clients still saw as trendy luxuries. Marcus, who had consistently tabled my proposals as too experimental, appeared particularly rattled. Rosenthal's work is conceptually strong, he offered during one of our last handoff meetings, but niche. Most developers aren't going to pay for water-positive design or habitat integration. I smiled thinly. They will when it becomes the standard. Cities are adjusting incentives, and insurers are giving breaks for resilient buildings. The industry is shifting. He shrugged, unmoved. Still risky. You had momentum here. You are on track for senior associate. At a boutique firm, your path is less clear. His concern was framed as practical advice, but I'd heard this script before. Prioritize stability. Settle for alignment later. Maybe. I'm redefining success on my terms, I told him. The words simple, but seismic. Alignment with my values matters more than whatever milestone someone else has set. His silence was all the confirmation I needed. For years, men like Marcus had made decisions about who got heard, who got credit, who got groomed for leadership. I was done waiting for permission. Outside of work, I focused on the tangible, gave notice on my apartment, reviewed neighborhood guides Cole had sent me, sorted through every item I owned to decide what was worth hauling across the country and what could stay behind. For the first time, cost wasn't a deciding factor. I didn't have to choose the cheapest movers or give away furniture I couldn't afford to replace. I wasn't calculating down to the last dollar. I had options. The restored inheritance gave me space, not just financially, but emotionally. No more second guessing whether I could risk a different kind of life. I wasn't just preparing for a move. I was discarding a whole belief system built by people who taught me to settle. And every box I taped shut felt like a door opening. From a financially constrained professional to a secure investor in my own potential. From dutiful daughter silently accepting diminished support to an independent woman reclaiming her full inheritance with grit and grace. The transformation wasn't just about money. It was linguistic, philosophical, foundational. I had to unlearn the dialect of limitation and instead teach myself the language of rightful expectation. I replaced realistic with possible, practical with aligned, acceptable with extraordinary. I wasn't just rewriting my resume, I was rewriting the terms of my existence. This wasn't a pivot, it was a reconstruction of what I could and should demand from life. The process was jagged, disorienting, overwhelming in ways that no spreadsheet or relocation checklist could prepare me for. But with every box taped, every reservation confirmed, every boundary redrawn, the new syntax of self worth became clearer, firmer, more fluently mine. Because I was not simply moving to Portland, I was translating myself, converting the stifled version shaped by family biases into something fuller, truer. I wasn't changing employers. I was tearing down the scaffolding built by other people's limited vision and rebuilding on my own blueprint. And in that translation, I finally saw myself not as someone lucky to be included, but as someone who should have been invested in all along. This time, I wasn't asking for permission. I wasn't performing capability in hopes of recognition. I was owning it, becoming it. And that finally was the real inheritance I had been denied, but now claimed in full.